Great. Let's get the show on the road. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the session. I'm Gabriel. I'm the Management Executive at First Digital, a First Technology Division. We are very excited to host today's event and give you this practical overview of document processing. We'll be talking about document capture, paper documents. We'll be talking about storing documents and some very clever ways to retrieve documents through some automation, more specifically some RPA. The session has two parts to it. First, we'll demystify what these terms mean. What does document processing mean? And secondly, we'll give you a demonstration of technology about how this can be achieved effectively in your business. Making our companies better and more efficient is important. Our customers demand top-notch service these days, especially in this work-from-anywhere world we're living in at the moment. So relying on paper or wet signatures just doesn't work, or if it does, greatly limits our ability to be efficient and to be agile. So today's webinar is not a theoretical training session. It's a practical overview of how a paperless world can look, using tools such as KnowledgeLake. And most importantly, how the solution to document processing can be turned into a shared service in your business. The session will be hosted by Joe Lauber from North America, representing KnowledgeLake. So welcome, Joe. I'll hand over to you in a second. And then I'd also like to welcome at the same time Konstantin Eck from KnowledgeLake, who will give you a great overview of the actual KnowledgeLake technology. So KnowledgeLake is a long-standing partner of First Digital. It's a relationship that dates back to the inception of First Digital. And we're quite honored to have them on the call with us. And I've already extended the apology to them, but I'll do that again. They are North America based, so it's pretty early where they are. And I appreciate the time that they've made available to share with us today. And then lastly, Stephanie Brainard is operating the cogs. If you've got any issues, any technical issues or any other issues that you need some assistance with, please reach out to her using the chat function in the Teams client and she'll try and assist you. So First Digital builds out many value-added services across various technology verticals. Our business is made up of five main pillars. Our innovation team is our custom software development team, where we build a complicated transactional website, mobile apps, and a lot of integration between systems, predominantly using Microsoft-based technology. Our automation and integration business are our workflow guys. There we are long-standing partners with Nintex, K2, and we also have a Microsoft BizTalk capability in that team. Our digital workplace team, which is an Office 365 focused team. So our SharePoint Online capability and Power Platform capability, for instance, sits in our digital workplace team. And then lastly, our data and analytics and machine learning team, who is very much a data aggregation and visualization business, hopefully focusing again on the Microsoft stack. So before we start, and I guess just to break the ice a little bit, we'd like to do a quick poll, which you'll see will pop up in your Teams client right now. And the question that we're posting to the audience is, which document, electronic document management or document processing solutions are you currently using today? So if you guys just want to select an option in that poll and then make your selection, and we'll discuss that towards the end of the session. Okay, great. Thank you for that. At the heart of First Digital, we take customers on transformation journeys. And in this next session, Joe will explain the crucial parts of what is document processing, what makes up a decent document processing solution, and also how you can take an alternative approach by treating this ability as a shared service within your organization. So, Joe, I guess over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Gabriel. Let me share my screen here and we will get started. All right. I think we are set to go. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending today's webinar. I'm going to start off by saying something that might sound a bit provocative coming from a guy whose company makes document processing solutions, and that is stop buying document processing solutions. Now, I don't mean that literally. Obviously, that would be a bit disingenuous, but I do recommend that we stop buying and deploying these systems the way we've done so in the past, which is we buy it over and over again, quite often as part of a point solution. And when I say point solution, I'm talking about line of business systems. So I may have an accounting system and I store documents there, or I have an ERP system, I store documents there. That's a fairly common pattern that organizations engage in. And as you'll see as we go through this presentation, how that can be inefficient and expensive and create for poor experiences. So my recommendation for organizations is to look at document processing as a more holistic service that should be provided to the entire organization, as opposed to being provided by each one of those point solutions and being done a different way, different systems that people have to learn. So that is hopefully what you'll be taking away from what we're going to be presenting today. Now, document processing, it's a fairly generic term. What do we mean by that? And I think the best way to explain that is to kind of talk a little bit about the evolution of document processing over the years. And I'm going to start with the early 90s. That's when I started my career in document processing. It also marks the beginning of the PC-based document management systems. And for the most part, document management back in the early 90s was all about taking pictures of paper documents. And if you folks are as old as I am, you remember PC setups that had dedicated hardware. So we had monitors that were shaped like paper, so that people could very easily make that transition over. That they had higher resolutions, higher DPIs, so that you could read the small print on it. And most of the categorization was done manually. Most of the indexing of documents was people applying some metadata and that was typed in, and most of the focus was on storage and retrieve, kind of what we would refer to as document retention or records management. We wanted to basically keep a copy of the paper, but keep it in a more shareable, more durable form. As we started to evolve technologies like enterprise search and full text search, that's when people started saying, well, wait a second, all of this information that we have is really shared knowledge within the company. And it's not just documents that we scan and capture, but it's also documents that are born electronically and emails. And heck, while we're at it, why don't we include people's calendars? So all of a sudden, this segment of the market evolved called knowledge management, which was basically a way to take all of the content in an organization, store it in a central repository, and make it available to everybody on demand. And that sounds like a great idea. It was an ambitious goal, but what we did was we just created a tremendous amount of noise. Any organizations that had a knowledge management initiative created what I would call a content junk drawer. It was a place to dump everything. And because there was little context tying it all together, and because still so much content lived outside of that system, it never really did provide that shared knowledge capability that organizations were hoping for. So what it did do was kind of spur the growth of groupware. So products like Lotus Notes and Novell's GroupWise sprung out of that. Obviously, the Microsoft Office suite came out of that thinking as well, but it wasn't as successful as we had hoped. So the pendulum kind of swung again back to what we call enterprise content management. And that started to focus again more so on documents. But this time we included collaborative documents in addition to the transactional documents. And a lot of the focus there was about storing documents, granting access to a broader organization, managing them, and making sure that what we had complied with either government regulations or corporate policies. During that period of time, we also saw the emergence of intelligent capture, which is kind of the legacy of where KnowledgeLake comes from. And we still see a lot of ECM today. That's a good thing. However, there was one piece missing, and that was the operationalizing of documents. And that's what is kind of the rage today, which is IDP, intelligent document processing. And that is taking technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning and robotic process automation, or RPA, and using those technologies as a way to standardize the document onboarding of this content into the organization. Taking a document, mostly transactional, and operationalizing it, meaning taking a document like an invoice and not just taking a picture of it and storing it, but taking that document and using those technologies to categorize it, know what it is, it's an invoice, know what vendor it came from, and extracting the information from it so that it could be used to help facilitate the transaction that that document represents. And IDP does that for structured content, semi-structured content, unstructured content, and it also includes an ability to automate the process that facilitates whatever that document represents. So if it's an invoice, you have to pass that invoice around to make sure that it is approved by the appropriate people. We need to take the information that's contained in those documents and push it into the systems that are responsible for verifying it against purchase orders and paying it. So most of the focus that I'm going to be talking about today is on these two areas, the fusion of enterprise content management and intelligent document processing, because I think we finally have gotten to a place where we can process documents in a consistent way. Now what we need to do is we need to embed in folks a mindset of don't provide this at the application layer, move it up a level in the stack, just like we did with things like directory services. You know, most companies now have a directory service like Microsoft Active Directory or something like that, so that we don't have to build that intelligence into every single point application. Rather, we do it at the infrastructure level so that when we bring on an employee, we turn a few switches and now that person has access to everything they need. If that person leaves the organization, we can very quickly shut down their access. Well, document management is kind of the same thing, would benefit from the same mindset where we should standardize the way we bring documents into the organization, standardize the way that we process them so that we can make them operational. And then obviously when we store them, they're available for records management purposes. We provide contextual access and we can ensure that we're compliant with regulations. So how are organizations doing document processing today? Well, in this particular graphic, you'll see documents coming into the organization from everywhere: email, self-authored documents, mobile, scanner, et cetera, et cetera. And that's fine. And although we've been told that the number of documents are going to decrease, that really hasn't happened. We have more documents now than ever. Granted, we're seeing less paper documents than we have in the past, but we still have plenty of those. So that's not going away anytime soon. Where we've kind of dropped the ball a bit is on the right side of that graphic with regard to repositories. We had an original question in poll 1 that talked about what are you using for document repository? Are you using SharePoint? Are you using network shares? Well, I can tell you that lots of companies are using all of the above. So there are a number of organizations that have traditional ECM products. These are the OnBases of the world, the FileNets, the Laserfishes. The problem is a lot of organizations have more than one. And so when you have more than one ECM, that is an indication that, okay, I'm starting to experience fragmentation in just the way I store the documents and make available. That's not a good thing. Documents are often stored in transactional systems. And the reason for that is logical. When a document comes in, I want to keep that document close to the transaction that it represents. However, there are technologies available now that allow us to not have to do that so that we can confidently store documents in a central repository and then give contextual access from line of business systems. We're going to show you an example of that when we get to Constantine's section. Network shares is still the most prolific document management system that exists in business today and organizations. And that's somebody comes up with a folder-based taxonomy of how we're going to store our folders, and then they try to manage access control at the network level. And it's not a particularly efficient way of doing it. It is certainly not a very compliant way of doing it. In fact, there are lots of companies that put out software that are made just to take all of these data stores, whether it be network share or email documents or, you know, believe it or not, even users' local storage, and they will go and corral all that information and present that back so organizations can clean up those documents. They can put a layer of access control on top. And my feeling is that's kind of a stopgap. If you've got to purchase that kind of solution, you probably should take a step back and revisit your document repository strategy. When it comes to processing the documents, a lot of indexing is still done manually, although we have seen specialized capture and full text indexing, especially for specific types of transactions like invoices. Invoice is a great example. It's probably the best example of what has been handled quite well in the document processing world because there are so many vendors that do it, and it's such a common use case. Everybody understands it. It's one of the first ones that they go to take care of. Workflow is also fairly prolific, but again, there aren't many organizations that have said, okay, we're going to take workflow and we're going to abstract it out to the infrastructure and use a product like Gabriel mentioned before, Nintex or K2, which I guess are now one and the same. What they do is they implement workflow again at the line of business level. So if it's an accounting workflow, the accounting system manages the workflow. If it's a shipping workflow, well, that's in my 3PL or my logistics system. And that serves the organizations okay, but it does provide these clunky experiences and inconsistency that take time and create errors. And then in terms of access to those documents, there's still a lot of ad hoc access. And a lot of that is driven by the fact that a lot of document management systems in place today are still on-prem. So once we had the pandemic, all of a sudden that exposed a huge vulnerability that if all of a sudden an organization has to go remote, how will people have access to those systems? And doing it by providing remote, RDP sessions and Citrix sessions is a heavier lift than if that system was just cloud native. And there's also a lack of accountability. How can there not be when documents for a particular entity, a customer, an employee, or whomever, are spread across potentially an ECM, they're in a transactional system, they're on network shares and people's emails and on people's hard drives. So that's kind of the state of the state. It's okay, but it can be done a lot better. And what we propose is basically putting this ring of document processing shared services around the organization so that as those documents come in, they don't go through a window or through a door. They all come in through this central document processing hub. And from there, and this is usually quite applicable to transactions, is that the system is responsible for generating the checklist of documents that are required for a particular transaction. The system provides the negotiation mechanism. I do a lot of work in the banking and financial services world, and despite all of the great technology solutions that exist for things like loan origination and account opening, when it comes to the document processing aspect, most are not good at it, despite the fact that they've spent a ton of money on these great solutions. And that's because the document processing part and the document collection part is often an afterthought. And so if you're thinking about a bank, let's say, and I opened an account there a year ago, and now I want to take out a business loan for my business. Most banks treat me as if they've never seen me before, and they ask me for the same documents that they've asked me for when I became an account holder or a credit or a member. And so that experience becomes disjointed, and that's driven by the fact that, well, the account system handles the collection of documents for account opening. The loan origination system is responsible for gathering the documents for loan origination, et cetera, et cetera. So by creating this central hub, you can create these consistent experiences that basically asks the customer, the employer, the vendor, whoever it is, for documents in one way. Hopefully you're not asking them for the same documents over and over again. And all of that is governed based on what's the transaction type, what's the content type. And based on that, there's a different workflow or collection flow that is enabled to go and gather those documents. When we get to processing, we're using machine learning for the purposes of classification. What is the document? Extraction of information so that we can now move this transaction on its way. And that's where workflow comes in, because now that we've got a document, we've got the data extracted, we can now start to push the document in front of the people who need to see it and put it into the systems that need it in order to facilitate the transaction that it represents. And then, of course, when the transaction is complete, or really anywhere along the way, depending upon how the organization prefers to do it, we then we release that information to the downstream repository and the downstream systems. And then when it comes to storage and access, the documents are centralized in a secure and scalable, available from anywhere repository where folks have contextual access from line of business applications. Again, that's the number one reason why people don't want to put documents in a central location, is because they say they need contextual access from a transaction. Well, now you can do that. By doing so, you've got guaranteed compliance, and you also have a reduction in having documents basically dwell in places that they shouldn't be, like people's hard drives and people's email accounts, or worse yet, in someone's personal email account, which I've seen at some financial institutions, which is here in the States is a tremendous compliance violation. So how do we do this? How do we create that ring? Well, you need these pillars of services. And as you'll see when Konstantin does the demo, the KnowledgeLake platform presents these pillars of services. It all starts with an intelligent capture capability, a omni-channel capture, so that we can gather all those documents from all those sources, regardless of how they're being sent to us, regardless of what the format is. And by the way, although those slides indicated that documents flow into the organization, a lot of times the organization needs to reach out and grab those documents from the original source. So for example, there's a client that I work with where their largest customer doesn't send them invoices. They need to go to the client's website and every day, multiple times a day, pull down those orders. So using our omni-channel capability and RPA, they were able to create a workflow that almost on a continual basis goes out to that website and pulls down any new orders that apply to them, which allows them to start processing the order faster with less people being used to go and pull down those orders. Once the documents are retrieved or received, however we do it, again in a consistent way, we then use those technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, RPA, APIs, et cetera, to classify the documents, to extract the information, and then start to move that information on its way. And that's for structured documents, semi-structured, unstructured documents, and all available in the cloud so that we're satisfying that requirement for always on, available from anywhere. Once we've got the document, we've extracted the information, we move on to the automation and workflow pillar. And that's where we start to facilitate the transaction that the document represents. So if it's a contract, that needs to be routed through the legal department. If it's an invoice, that may need to go through a procurement system, that may need to be routed to the person who generated the original PO, and then that person's superior who needs to approve it. All of that is handled by that workflow pillar. And then once the transaction is facilitated, the document comes to rest in the storage facility where it is securely stored. We have access to the documents from anywhere via a QBE style search, full text search, and also something that is kind of unique to our platform, which is a one-click contextual search from within line of business applications. And then, of course, now that we've gathered all of these documents and we've stored them in a central repository, we can do a lot better reporting in terms of analyzing transactions, analyzing the performance of our document gathering processes, and most importantly, being able to conduct stress-free audits, because we're confident that whatever our auditors are going to be asking for, we'll be able to produce for them. So these are the pillars that are required in order to build that ring of document processing services. Without it, you're just basically recreating that Frankenstein monster of systems. So what are the benefits? I hope they're obvious at this point by implementing this kind of strategy, and that is it's very cost effective to do this because you're purchasing your document processing capability once instead of rebuying it with every line of business system that you purchase. And it's available to everywhere. You don't have to worry about, okay, is the vendor, did they make this available via the cloud? Do they support authenticated and unauthenticated users? No, that should be handled by that documents processing service. There's also lower costs in terms of setting it up and supporting it. Setting up and supporting one way of doing things is a lot less expensive than doing it multiple ways. It's more efficient. Transactions are processed faster with less errors. So we talked before about the client that has to reach out to that customer to get orders. Well, now that frees up the people who used to manually do that, and it also allows them to bring those orders into their processing stream a lot faster than they did before. Quite often, an order wasn't processed until the next day. Now the order can be processed immediately as it's received, so it's a lot more efficient. Consistent experiences. Again, this is big that I see in the financial services market. One of the number one complaints that banking customers have is that the experience with the financial institution is inconsistent. They message me differently. They don't seem to understand my entire financial picture. They advertise things to me that are not relevant, yet when things are highly relevant, they're nowhere to be found. And when I do find them and I ask them, I have to give them all my information again. So by creating this centralized document processing system, you are creating way more consistent experiences for your customers, for your employees, which are getting, as we all know, more difficult to find, more expensive to bring on board. And now if we have to train them on 10 different ways of doing things, that becomes a lot more expensive, a lot more difficult to do. And by the way, the employees are smart. They're all looking at the way the organization works. And if they come into an organization that's got this disjointed, we do it 10 different ways systems, chances are they're going to look at that and say, I don't know, did I make the right decision coming to work for this company? Because it sounds like they're a little bit behind the times. Maybe I should look somewhere else, especially since I'm in such high demand. In terms of compliance and reporting, it's all improved, easier to line up with the organization's KPIs and goals. No documents are getting lost, and fewer of those documents are residing in places that they shouldn't, like people's hard drives and email. And then there's the contextual access from anywhere. And this is something that a lot of people don't ask for because they think it's not possible. And then when they see it, they start to say, well, how did I live without this? Because this is a game changer for us, and we're going to show that. So that's the idea. We've got a demonstration that Constantine is going to show. Before that, I believe we have a second poll question. So Stephanie or Gabriel, if we could fire that up.
Yes, thank you so much, Joe, for framing that challenge so nicely. Indeed, let's bring up that second poll. And you'll see there the question that we're posting to the audience is, to what degree does inconsistent document practice affect you? So now these are any kind of inconsistencies around how you treat certain documents, be they invoices or contracts or HR related documentation. What is the impact of that? And I'll give you guys again a couple of seconds to just to complete that poll. Excellent, thank you. So, Joe, thanks again for framing the components of document processing so nicely, and the suggestion, if you treat this as a central shared service. And I happily want to hand over to Constantine, who's going to give us a practical demonstration of what Joe's just talked about. So, Constantine, over to you.
Great, thanks a lot, Gabriel, and thank you, Joe, for the rundown of the platform as a whole. So I'm going to walk you guys through KnowledgeLake, but in terms of kind of mimicking Joe's slides, as far as documents need to come in through a central platform, captured. We're trying to automate the capture part of it. We're trying to automate the classification, extraction, separation of data. Hopefully provide a easy UI for the user to get involved in order to make any adjustments or corrections, and then finally release the documents to wherever they need to go and have easy access to those documents from anywhere. So what you're seeing right now on the screen is my landing page for KnowledgeLake. It is accessible via browser of your choice. Typically, we recommend you log in via Azure Active Directory credentials, but you could do local catalogs as well if you prefer. But realistically, one of the benefits of the platform as a whole is that you are not limited to a particular machine, right? You can work from anywhere. I personally have worked from different countries just by simply logging in with my credentials and having access to everything I need access for. So I'm gonna not go into every detail possible because I think we'll need a couple of hours for that. But please, if you have questions along the way, just drop them in the chat, and they can be either answered in line by Joe or Gabriel, or we can discuss them afterwards. So from a capture point of view, really, there's a couple of ways that I want to highlight from that we're able to capture documents. So for those that are still dealing with paper, we give you the ability to scan directly through the browser. This will work with any Twain scanner. You can import from here as well. And the benefit to you is that you could simply configure these profiles centrally, share them with different users, and then without having to have anything else being installed or taken care of, you can either scan or import directly from here and start your process from anywhere. At this point, we do give you the ability to do any kind of doc assembly of moving pages around if needed, rotation, rescan. You can delete pages if they weren't meant to be there. One thing that I have hidden in this environment is the index panel. And that is because a benefit of KnowledgeLake is the ability to automatically separate these pages into their own unique documents as necessary and extract the necessary information. So all I have to do is really press complete. As you notice, it is not asking me where these documents need to go because that part gets automated as well, but by the backend functionality. And as a user, I am done with my batch and I can move on to something else to go from there. The other aspect of ingestion that I want to focus on is electronic documents coming in. So what you saw on the previous screen, you could either use for importing documents or for scanning documents. What I want to show you now is if documents are flowing through your organization via things like email, how we were able to capture them at the point of a record, as opposed to having to ask you to move things around or download or print or do anything of the sort. So there's two main ways of doing this. One is more of an ad hoc way. So if I'm in this particular email, I'm seeing that I have this particular invoice that I want to interact with. What KnowledgeLake has is we have hooks directly into the Office suite of products from 2013 to higher, where you can press on the add-in. It gives you an interaction panel on the right-hand side, and you could say what is relevant for you to ingest. Do you want to bring the email as an email as a whole? Maybe just the attachment is what's relevant for you. So you can make that change. You have the drop-down based on your permissions of the different content types that are available to you. And then you could either manually index it or leverage things like database lookups to perform auto-indexing and then just upload the document directly from here. Now, the more common use case for email ingestion is you have a dedicated inbox for, in my case, invoices. It could be vendor agreements or contracts or applications, whatever that may be. So part of the platform is we give you the ability to run import jobs. The import jobs can run on whatever schedule makes sense for the organization. You can get really granular and say, look, I want to run this on the 18th and the 24th of every month on 23-hour intervals. Or you could switch to the pre-built templates of saying, run continuously or run every 10 minutes or run business hours only. You can also dictate which process does this need to get routed to. So once again, we are taking that decision out of the user's hands to make sure we eliminate any kind of user error. And we're saying which inbox or which folder to monitor and where do we want to kind of offload those emails once they're ingested. So what the import job does is it looks at all of the unread emails that are in this particular folder. It's going to mark them off as read and then move them over to a different folder. So there's a clear delineation of these documents coming in via an import job from KnowledgeLake or versus a user manually going in there and doing something. And the same way that we have an import job for email, we can have an import job monitoring a UNC path as well. So if you're leveraging things like multifunction devices in your organization, you can keep doing what you're doing, release those documents either to an email or into a folder structure, and we can monitor that on the same type of schedule and bring in those documents as well to where you don't have to scan, move around, or do anything else from that point. So once documents are ingested, really a lot of what happens next in an ideal situation happens behind the scenes. There's nothing else for me to show you. However, what I've done in my environment is I've asked to stop documents, always the batches, so that I can show you what happens behind the scenes. So this index app that I went into has two tabs. It has my batches and all batches. So my batches are those that I had previously opened to process. I didn't finish for one reason or another, so it's locked to me as a user. Versus all batches are those that I have permissions for. So there may be hundreds of batches flowing through. However, based on my unique permissions, I am only allowed to interact with batches coming through the mixed document process. So if there was, let's say, multiple ones in here, and my role in the organization is to validate these documents all day, I can press on begin indexing. Or if I know that I'm handling 3 different types of jobs and one of them, in this case, mixed docs is more time sensitive than the other, I can just go here on the right hand side and cherry pick the things that I want. So I'll say I want to open up this mixed batch process. So what you're seeing now on the screen is the same multi-page diff that I imported using the scan app. You could see that it was broken apart into individual documents. And you could see that the metadata information on the right-hand side has been filled out. The screen itself is broken up into 3 sections. So as I mentioned, index panel on the right-hand side, document is in the middle, and on the left-hand side, you have your batch panel preview. So if you still want to do any kind of doc assembly, rearrange things, you still can. but it gives you a breakdown of here's your document 1, document 2, and so forth and so on. And there's 2 little icons next to it. So the green check mark means that any validation rules that I put in place have been sufficed. Validation rules could be as simple as you have required fields. Are they filled in? Yes or no? They could be more complex as the value needs to match a particular input mask, or it could be OCR confidence needs to be at least X amount for it to be considered valid. So if there's a green check mark, that means all the things that we're looking for have been there. And in a production environment, there would be no logical reason for me to stop this batch for review. It could have gone straight through without any user interaction. The other icon is this little brain thing that probably is hard to see as a brain through WebEx. However, what this does is tells us the confidence level of classification, right? So in all of these cases, they're all green, saying that it is pretty confident that this indeed is an application, a classified application, equipment agreement form, and then I-9, W-4 invoices going downstream. And what we also give you the ability to do is provide inline feedback if you wanted to perform that. So if you have a use case where, let's say, you're dealing with different vendors and you have thousands of vendors coming through and a lot of them look very similar, what this little brain will give you the ability to do is kind of get a snapshot of which ones are more likely to have any kind of issues with them. We have this little ribbon telling you that it matched to, in this case, an application from 7-Eleven. Is it correct? Yes or no? And you can provide that real-time feedback. What you could also do is say, I want to click on some more information and see that it was 90% confident in that it was the 7-Eleven application. I had this other application that was 4.5% match with. So you can kind of have this drop down of available comparisons, and you can provide that real-time feedback on what needs to be there. And if it did get it wrong for any reason, you could, but it should have gotten it right because it already exists in the system. You could simply do this drop down. It lines them up in order of most likely, and you can kind of reshuffle it and say, nope, it's supposed to be an application, not a 7-Eleven application next time you see it, to kind of give that positive or negative feedback to the fingerprints so it can kind of reinforce that behavior. And hopefully, if it did make a mistake in the future, by giving that feedback, it'll avoid those mistakes. On the extraction side, as you can see, there's some blue and red boxes or orange boxes, depending on the screen that you're seeing over here. So what those are doing is creating those anchors of key value pairs of saying, whenever you find the term name, last, first, middle, go ahead and look down and extract everything in those red boxes. I could turn on my snippets to see what it's trying to extract, which becomes very useful if I'm dealing with like a very large document, multiple pages. Instead of having to browse through each one to see where the information should be, turn on my snippets, get a snapshot of what I'm trying to extract, and see what it actually ended up getting to move on from there. And as I mentioned, we can overlay behaviors on top of this. So for instance, with this dummy social security number, I put a behavior to say, I don't want to allow dashes, right? Because there could be a situation where somebody makes a mistake, and if they're doing this manually, they can go ahead and add the dashes by hand. But the moment that I tap out of it or try to save it, it removes those dashes to make sure that it's a uniform experience as it goes through, and that the output's going to be the same regardless if it's done by a machine or by a human. So as I go through these, kind of just to highlight a couple of things. One is obviously things like barcode reading are available and possible. We have the ability to do signature detection. I mentioned earlier the ability to do database lookups, and there's a live lookup. So if I happen to reshuffle it, you could see it changes the information that's available over here. And the other thing that I want to point out is, in the first case with the application, we saw that it looked for the pattern of last name, first name, middle name, whatever it was that the text that was on there. However, it is possible that you may get documents where the quality is pretty poor with the text. This one happens to be scanned and rescanned and printed and rescanned. So if I'm looking at print name, you can see that the letters are starting to bleed together, the text. So what we have the ability to do is, instead of using only OCR to find our anchor points, we have the ability to do images as well. So here I drew a box saying, look for this particular image. I don't care about the coordinates of it. I don't care what page it's on or anything of the sort. Once I find an image that looks like this, That becomes my anchor point. I can go down and extract the relevant piece of information, whether that's text or OMR markings for checkboxes, and populate the correct information for me. So this way you have best of both worlds, where you can leverage the text as necessary, you can leverage the images as necessary, and we're able to extract text, OMR markings, find out if there's a signature attached. So it becomes a very powerful tool to have at your disposal. And as I go through these, obviously, I just want to kind of give you a mixture of the different types of documents that could lend itself well to it. We have seen a lot of use for vendor invoices, mostly because from a classifications point of view, once we grab this information, things that may be important to you, like vendor ID, will typically not be on the actual invoice. But we do have the ability to say, once you classify a document, not just set the content type, but automatically set some fixed values that will eliminate the need to have to extract something from the document itself and minimize those clicks, even if there is any kind of exception that needs to go along. But beyond all that, really from a user point of view, the only document that would need my attention is this one invoice here that's expanded that doesn't have the green check mark. And what we could see here is that the issue was the PO number. The PO number was not properly extracted. So there are two behaviors attached over here. One is it's a required field, which check mark, there's a value there, so that fulfills it. The other behavior is that it has to be at least 50% confidence. In this case, the confidence is 30%, so it flagged it as an exception saying, look, I know we got something, so we filled out the requirement of being required. However, OCR confidence is lower than we would like. Please double check it, and in this case, it is obviously wrong. So from a user point of view, I can go in here, make my change. In my case, I'm using the database once again to kind of leverage those valid invoices. And now I am done with my indexing. I can just save it from here and move on and take this 9-page or 9-document batch and really have to make one change within those documents on one document. Everything else kind of flows straight through. So once I'm done over here, the document can keep going down its process. So for instance, if I have requirements for things like approval based on dollar amount or anything else of the sort, we have the ability to have those documents flow based on those decisions. Not going to spend too much time on here, but just want to kind of show you what's possible within the platform is for things like workflow, where you want to be able to have a customized screen for approval processing. We do have tasks where you could change the layout, resize it, move things around, but pretty much the idea here is that as documents flow through the system, you can have a structure where here is my document. I can see the total is over 10,000. Here are all the properties that are associated with it, whether those be metadata values or system properties, and then build out your Q&A section that could be linked to metadata properties within the content type. So everything gets mapped together so you can search on it later. And you could say, do you approve this invoice? Yes or no. If not, you get more questions being asked to kind of build out this structure going forward. So at this point, once an invoice or once anything is approved, it'll keep flowing down the rest of the path and do what it needs to do, which in a lot of times, what it needs to do is then take this information, send it over to the repository of choice. And I saw in the first poll, I think most of you said SharePoint is what you're currently using, which works really great with our environment. So it'll send the documents to SharePoint, but likely that data needs to reside somewhere else as well. So that's really where RPA comes into play. So the ability to say, okay, documents are going to go to SharePoint or repository of your choice. However, this data still needs to be entered into some line of business application. So instead of having a user dedicate their time to say, let me go ahead and rekey everything that was just automatically extracted, you can leverage RPA to say, once this goes through the process, let a bot wake up in your environment, whether that's one or multiple, we don't really care. Log into the application of your choosing and start doing the data entry on the user's behalf. So on the user's behalf, I mean instead of, I don't mean with their same credentials. Obviously, the bots will have their own credentials from a security and compliance point of view, but you can automate that process where data entry is obviously highly critical but very repetitive and lends itself very nicely to this structure. So here what you're seeing is multiple bots working at the same time, doing data entry to say, you could scale as much as you like, we really don't care, but you could scale that and go from there. So once everything is where it needs to be, the data is where it needs to be, now it's a matter of finding the relevant information. So couple of ways of doing that. For those of you that are leveraging SharePoint, or if you're leveraging something like Azure or AWS, we have the search capability built into our platform, where you can go into search. Depending on your permissions, you have searches available to you, and when you make a selection of the search you want to run, you can say, I want to search by the metadata and find all documents related to this particular PO number. Run the search, and it gives you back your required documents directly from here. The other option, which I think is the more exciting one, in my opinion, is as a user, you're likely going to spend a lot of time in whatever line of business application you need to spend time in. So as you kind of click around and go through the different tabs of whatever that you're doing, and I'm using Salesforce purely as an example. This could be a web-based application. It could be a green screen like an AS400. It could be really anything that's out there from an application point of view. We really don't care. It makes no difference to us. But what you get as a benefit is that as you're on a particular screen that we've trained the system to recognize, this little icon here, what we call the magic button, pops up. And what this allows you to do is have contextual access to the information on the screen. So for instance, it could be as simple as, hey, I want to find all my documents related to Andy Young. I can click on the button. Since I have multiple actions, I can choose which one I want to run. So I'll press retrieve signed documents, make that statement. It'll read the name from the screen, pass that along the search query URL, and give me back my results. Now, I have these documents that in my case are stored in Azure. I have Salesforce, which has no hooks directly into KnowledgeLake or vice versa. There is no communication outside of that magic button. And now I can click on the button in Salesforce and have my documents visible to me that are stored in SharePoint or in Azure. And now here's my document. I can do things like full text search. The benefit here is that it also highlights the text around it. So if I want to click on something, it'll jump to that location on the page to get easier to find. So I have my document, my metadata once again, and you get the added benefit also of having the ability to add annotations. You could add your own image stamps. You can highlight things. So a lot that you could do on here, as well as obviously, which is entirely permission driven, but you can edit the document, edit the metadata, copy, print, download, delete. All that's available to you at your fingerprints directly through our viewer here. So now this is the part that I think Joe's mentioned several times, and I really want to highlight it again, is that regardless of your application, the best practice will be to store your documents in the centralized repository, so that from a compliance point of view, you don't have multiple versions floating around. You can keep track of it from a security standpoint, but leverage that magic button in this case to have access to those documents from wherever that you are. So I'm going to wrap it up over here so we have time for some questions. So Gabriel, hand it over back to you.
Great. Konstantin, thank you so much for that.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and I think that last point is especially pertinent given Joe's message around single document processing capability that you can very easily link up to any line of business system through your so-called magic button. One of the questions that was posted directly to me, Konstantin, I think you can cover this one. It is also in relation to our poll. So yeah, 80% of you guys indicated that you use SharePoint as your document repository. That's obviously music to KnowledgeLake's ears because they've got a long-standing relationship with SharePoint. What other repositories do you support, Konstantin?
Yeah. So as far as so as far as direct hooks into it, SharePoint has absolutely been our first class citizen for a very long time, and that's both SharePoint Online and SharePoint On-Prem. From supporting documents of directly sending them there, as well as retrieval. As I mentioned, it's also Azure and AWS. For a lot of the other ones that may be either smaller or not as prevalent, at least in our environments, we give you the ability to release documents with metadata to a file system along with CSV, XML, or JSON, so that most of those other applications have the ability to just ingest those versions in order to get them wherever they need to go. And aside from that, obviously, we do have the ability to expand beyond that. We've had a very large partner who is the #1 reseller of OnBase. So they've developed a direct connector into OnBase for them to use. So with the extensibility is there for us to connect to anything, but out of the box, it was those main 3 ones of SharePoint, Azure, and AWS, as well as the file system destination as well.
Gabriel, one other point to make too is that magic button can work with any repository. Since it's RPA by definition, it doesn't matter what the backend repository is. And it's important to mention that because the KnowledgeLake platform can be implemented on a pillar basis. So for example, if you wanted to use KnowledgeLake to do everything you saw, but for whatever reason you want to store your documents in some other repository other than any of the ones that we support directly, that doesn't mean that you lose the contextual search access through the magic button. That'll work just as well.
Right. Yeah, and that's a good description. Like for instance, in South Africa, as you would have noticed from the poll, SharePoint's a quite a popular document repository, and ACPAC on the other hand is a fairly popular ERP and finance system that we use. So what you're saying is, for instance, when you're opening up an invoice record in ACPAC, the button can be there. You click on it, and it immediately brings up that invoice that's stored in your SharePoint repository. It's kind of like creating a seamless link between those 2 systems as an example.
Absolutely. And if you wanted to, which we didn't show an example of because it kind of is a whole different area, is from within SharePoint. Let's say if I'm looking at that invoice, the image of it in KnowledgeLake, I could put a button there. When clicked, will actually go and bring me to the record in the accounting system if I want to see it. So that communication, it works both ways.
Brilliant. Okay, yeah, that's a very, very valid point to make. Joe, maybe just for you, since you've got the mic there, you saw from the poll the cost around or the impact of inconsistent document processing. Now, do know KnowledgeLake had some interesting stats at one point around the cost of misplaced invoices, for instance, or recreating invoices that went missing. And as you could see from the poll, everybody agrees, you know, it's almost 60% agree that there's a significant impact. Sure. On business for inconsistent document processing. You obviously share that sentiment.
Absolutely. And I think when we put out statistics on what it costs, we usually focus on the manual effort. What does it take for Joe to go and find a document that's not where it's supposed to be? But we don't factor in the costs of potential brand damage or losing a customer, or what are the compliance fees that we might be charged as a penalty because we can't produce documents. Here in the United States, there's new regulation that's coming out over the next 12 months that has to do with increasing equity in lending. And so, for example, if the current laws read that when I engage with you, Gabriel, and let's say you come to me and you want to take out a loan, that's where the process starts. In a year from now, where the process is going to start is when you and I start talking about a loan. So if we go to our kids' soccer game and we start talking and you say, oh, maybe I should contact your bank, Joe, and take out a loan, that has to start, that documentation process has to start right then and there. So the fines are going to increase significantly for organizations. And as we know with a lot of these regulatory bodies, showing that you're making the best good faith effort is enough to keep them at bay. And if they come in and they see that you're not even doing the basics with regard to compliance, that's going to spur them to look further and fine you more heavily. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me to see the results of the poll. And I'm sure if folks think about potential lost business, fines, et cetera, that those numbers, that significant impact would be even higher.
Okay, great. And then we've got about 2 minutes left. Another question that just came directly to me, and I know this from experience with your software, a relationship between a physical document and an electronic one through a barcode, for instance. You know, on the African continent, we like our paper, and some of our legislation still mandate storing of physical records. maybe briefly, either one of you, just how that relationship can be achieved in the KnowledgeLake suite. When you've got to physically still store that document, but obviously you want the electronic version to point you to where the physical one might be through a barcode or.
Constantine, you want to take that?
Yeah, so I mean, the ability to read barcodes is definitely part of it, including things like patch codes, which I mostly outdated but still use. So within our platform, in 2 spots, in our backend processing as well as the scan app, you have the ability to map the barcodes, how to read them, and where to store that information. So if you're saying you're gonna have information on the barcode that links to a physical location, that could be stored as metadata by simply reading the barcode either through the scan app or as it goes to the backend processes if it comes in electronic already.
Okay, great. Excellent. Well, we're about out of time, so I want to firstly thank the 2 of you for making time available. I also apologize for my bad audio at the start. We've been having internet issues in the location that I am today, so apologies for that. And then thank you everybody else for attending our webinar. It's much appreciated your time. Contact details will be shared with you after the event, so will a link to the recording once that's ready. And feel free to reach out to ourselves if you've got any questions or you are interested in exploring the KnowledgeLake platform any further with Joe or Constantine. But thank you very much, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you, folks, for having us.
Thank you.
Have a good day.